Well, thanks again. I, I'm Tony Prestigiacomo. I supervise the DEC's Finger Lakes Watershed Program. Most of you know who I am. If you've seen this presentation given previously, it hasn't changed much, but in the spirit and kind of the next phase of Cayuga Lake Watershed Management, we're working through talking through what the TMDL is about and what it means moving forward. So I'm going to hop right into it. So the Cayuga Lake TMDL has been approved. It was approved in July of 2024 by the US EPA. And so now what happens is that becomes part of New York's water quality management system. And I'll get into exactly what the TMDL was and what it said. So what is a TMDL? So a TMDL is an acronym for total maximum daily load. Essentially what a TMDL is it's a regulatory document that a state has to develop and the EPA must approve if a water body or a water body segment is impaired for a pollutant. And I'm using the word water body or water body segment because in New York State, we inventory water bodies, based on ID numbers. Most lakes are one water body segment, but in the case of some lakes like Cayuga, there are multiple segments within a water body. Not that necessarily matters, but for Cayuga Lake, we're talking about the southern end portion of Cayuga Lake. And impaired in this case means something very specific. Sorry, I'm going to move this thing. Can you see there it is. Okay. Impaired is a regulatory term referring to waters that do not meet their best uses and are violating a water quality standard. And that is as determined by DEC's consolidated assessment and listing methodology for a particular pollutant. So it is required by Section 303D of the Clean Water Act. It requires watershed and in-water body modeling in most cases. An implementation plan for a TMDL is not required. It can be separate in cases. A section is required for implementation for a TMDL. TMDLs can be done to protect water bodies in addition to restore water bodies. And these protective TMDLs are generally done in combination or conjunction with a restoration TMDL, which Cayuga Lakes was. So Cayuga's TMDL. So the document itself and all of the appendices that went into it, including the targets, how they were derived, some summaries of the water quality model and its performance, financial resources for implementation are all found on the DEC's website. The little box is highlighted here. The TMDL document itself looks like this, and the appendices are all sandwiched into one big PDF, so you could look at them if you'd like. And so the TMDL is calculated essentially from data sets collected from 2013. Data from the lake and the streams were collected. Phosphorus inputs from the lake from different sources were estimated via a watershed model or directly in the case of point sources being wastewater treatment plants or lake source cooling facility. A Cayuga Lake model was developed specifically for the TMDL based on all of the data that had been collected in the Cayuga Lake over the 1998 to 2013 period. It was developed, calibrated, and tested by the researchers at the Upstate Freshwater Institute. And its development was guided by the completion of a quality assurance project plan with specific quality assurance thresholds that needed to be met, and they were. So we have high confidence in the development and performance of this model. The lake was accurately simulated for a 16-year period. And then different scenarios were run in the model, considering, using the model until the TMDL targets were reached. And so point sources for this case were assumed to be at their permanent limits, which needed to be the way it was done because right in a regulatory sense, a wastewater treatment plant, as an example, has the ability to discharge at their permitted limit. In most cases, most wastewater treatment plants discharge at well below their permitted limits. Well, that's just maybe a point of interest. And so the TMDL was calculated based on the phosphorus load that the lake could receive, and the targets in the lake were met. And so all of that is done in the TMDL document and outlined in sections 2 in the TMDL, and then Appendix B and C describe the model, and then Appendix D talks through the in more detail the various scenarios that were looked at to determine the total maximum daily load that the lake could receive and still maintain water quality standards. So Cayuga's TMDL, the southern end was listed. It was listed as impaired for total phosphorus in 2002 on that version of the state's 303D list. And that was determined because the phosphorus value often exceeded the New York State guidance value for phosphorus for lakes at 20 micrograms per liter. And so to develop the TMDL, a whole watershed approach was used. As the research and the model was developed, we learned that what came into the southern end interacted with the rest of the lake, and what was happening at the rest of the lake was very important for driving water quality at the southern end, in addition to the tributaries that come in on the southern end. And so to be protective of the other lake segments and to restore the southern end, we took a whole watershed approach, which means the entirety of Cayuga's watershed is covered under the TMDL, which means any projects that folks want to do inside or outside of the impaired southern end segment, as long as it's in the Cayuga Lake watershed, will benefit from having a TMDL complete, like priority scoring for various state grant programs. The TMDL defines lake chlorophyll targets. I'll talk a little bit more about this later, and recommends phosphorus reductions to achieve the TMDL targets and the water quality standards. And so to do that, we're going to require both point and non-point source reductions to meet our targets. And non-point source areas in Cayuga Lake, like many other large lakes, especially the Finger Lakes in New York, non-point source areas are the dominant source of phosphorus in the lake. So what were the targets? We went with a chlorophyll A target for the lake instead of a phosphorus target. Chlorophyll A is a measure of lake response to phosphorus loading when phosphorus is limiting, which it is in Cayuga Lake. The reason we go with a chlorophyll A target in lakes is that usually is a response variable of interest. Chlorophyll A targets and TMDLs for nutrients have been approved by US EPA, across the country and in New York State. And reducing total phosphorus to the lake will result in total chlorophyll A. That was demonstrated in the CLM and provided in both the TMDL and the appendices to see just the exact reductions you get with the exact reductions you get in chlorophyll A with phosphorus reductions from the watershed. And so through the total maximum daily load calculations, a 30% reduction in TP loading was determined to achieve the TMDL chlorophyll targets in most years, and will result in phosphorus values less than the guidance value, and therefore achieve the water quality standard. And so that's what we're aiming for with Cayuga Lake. We're aiming for chlorophyll A to meet the targets we've put forward, which we'll talk about in a minute, and to continue to reduce phosphorus loadings until the lake consistently achieves those chlorophyll targets year after year. In Appendix A, there's more on how these targets were developed and reference to previous studies by Cliff Callanan and others, as summarized nicely in a paper in 2013, which looked at total phosphorus, chlorophyll A, and other data related to source waters in New York State, which included Cayuga Lake as one of those observations, along with the other 10 Finger Lakes. And from that paper, the recommended chlorophyll A levels were provided to be protective of source waters and recreation. And so what were the targets exactly? So Cayuga Lake here, the map on the right is the 4 regulatory segments of Cayuga Lake. There's the southern end, there's the main lake mid-south, that big blue area there that stretches around Lansing all the way up to almost Aurora. The main lake mid-north segment, and then the very small shallow segment at the very northern end of the lake is up there, the northern end. And so there's 4 regulatory segments. They have different classifications, which define their best use. The northern end is a Class B segment, which means it is usable for primary and secondary recreation and fishing. The mid-north and then the southern end segments are Class A, which means they are sources of water supply or listed as sources of water supply. And then the main lake mid-south is a Class AA, which is also a water supply source, but with limited and less treatment than the Class A segments. And so each of these segments has a class-specific target. The northern end is 8 micrograms per liter. The two Class A segments are 6 micrograms per liter. And the main lake mid-south, this big segment here, is 4 micrograms per liter. And so in a nutshell, the TMDL recommends a 30% total phosphorus reduction of around 131,000 pounds of phosphorus per year to meet its targets. Combinations of point sources and non-point sources will be needed to get these reductions. And we're going to talk through how we get there and how do we measure progress moving forward. So this little scheme is draft. You'll see the little draft watermark up top. I'm kind of putting together some things to communicate with people of all stakeholders to talk through how we implement not just our TMDLs, but our 9 element plans, other clean water plans. But essentially, what this is showing is that the information goes both directions, which is important. Policy programs and fundings kind of come from the top, from the US EPA down to the DEC, down to local and county governments and entities. Information moves back up in terms of monitoring data and needs from various partners, which we can use to understand water quality and how these practices are helping improve the lake. And then in terms of implementing non-point source controls, that happens at the local level with soil and water conservation districts, coalitions, IOs, regional and private partnerships, sometimes with private funding, sometimes with state and federal funds. And then regulating point sources is done by the DEC through our New York Code of Rules and Regulations, SPEEDIES program, and then enforcement of water quality standards. So the point source reductions in the TMDL, 3 SPEEDIES, that's State Pollution Discharge Elimination System facilities, are having their permits modified as a result of the TMDL to include either new or lower phosphorus concentration limits, meaning that they will not be able to discharge as much phosphorus as they used to before. So it's a more stringent permit, being more protective to get those benefits and load reductions. And those are listed here: Freeville, Interlochen, and then Ithaca Area Wastewater Treatment Facility. These are all underway. What happens is when a TMDL recommends a point source permit modification, those modifications get incorporated into a reasonable schedule for those facilities to upgrade to the correct treatment levels and facilities so that they're not immediately out of compliance. As an example, they'll have time to develop a plan to get treatment below the limits that we recommended. And the Ithaca Area Wastewater Treatment Facility, this is kind of a nuanced thing, but their permit is a pounds per day limit of 40 pounds per day. We did not reduce that 40 pounds per day, but a concentration limit was added to be consistent with how permits are being modified across the state as part of the regular process and part of TMDLs. So non-point source pollution is largely addressed through voluntary means, and continued and more implementation of best management practices will be needed to get the reductions we need from things like farm fields, residential neighborhoods, forests, open spaces, golf courses, et cetera. And so if you're looking for numbers, there's a lot of numbers in the TMDL. You'll see tables that kind of look like this. And what they're showing is the current and permitted loads to the lake, and then what the TMDL says needs to be reduced in order to meet the water quality targets that we talked about a few minutes ago. And that's done at a summary level, and it's done for each of the 4 watersheds that drain to their respective segments. And that's it's a little confusing, but that's the way when you do these restoration and protective TMDLs, you have to summarized by sub-watershed, not just one big lump for all of the watershed's inputs. And so, a bit on DEC's role and regulatory authority. One thing that I'm trying to be more clear about is when I say, non-point source implementation of best management practices is voluntary. That is true, but there are also laws and rules and regulations that we all have to live by in New York State to protect water quality. I'm not going to dive into exactly what they are, but they are all available online. New York Code of Rules and Regulations, Title 6, Chapter 10. Part 750 is where most of the pertinent ones are. They outline the classifications and standards of quality and purity for New York's waters, and they outline the DEC's roles in the SPEEDIES program. And in addition to those, DEC also investigates complaints about activities that may violate the environmental conservation law or the Code of Rules and Regulations. If a water quality standard is being violated, the DEC has the ability to step in, no matter who it is, to either informally or formally, change that behavior to protect water quality. All right, so implementing the TMDL. In the TMDL itself, you'll see a table, a long list of the projects that have been implemented in the Cayuga Lake watershed since 2013 through 2023, so about a decade. And those come from DEC's non-point source database from a few grant programs. And so inventorying what's been done in Cayuga Lake's watershed over the past decade.
You don't hear anything, right?
No.
Can everybody hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's me. I got to mute myself.
Okay, no problem. So inventorying what's been done in the Cayuga Lake watershed over the past 10 years, we estimate we're getting around 39,000 pounds of phosphorus reduced based on current levels of implementation. There's an asterisk there, which I'll talk about in a minute, which means that we need to get 92,000 pounds more reduced per year to hit our targets. And so obviously there's more work to be done. This asterisk is to remind me that these estimated pounds that we're getting are only from a handful of DEC grant programs like WQIP, the NPG program, and only a couple of ag and markets programs, which we also track, the Ag Non-Point Source program and climate resilient farming. And so one of the big challenges I have as the supervisor of the Finger Lakes Watershed Program is figuring out what else is being done that we're not currently tracking through other state grants, through private funds, through county appropriations, and get a better handle on what these numbers actually are in terms of implementing and getting the phosphorus loads reduced that we need. And so this is just summarizing, those projects awarded over the 2013 to 2022 period. It's about 40 projects. The full list is in the TMDL document, so you can look through and see who's doing what in the Cayuga Lake watershed. But it amounts to around 14 million in funding for various projects, including cover crops, nutrient management, stream bank stabilization, hydroseeding, land acquisition buffers, fencing exclusion, and some septic work as well. So a good mix of projects, but more work ahead of us for sure. And then finally, the continued implementation of the TMDL. There are resources in Section 7. Section 7 is the implementation section. I'm not going to read through all of these line by line, but there's a lot of information in there about the watershed, about the data that went into the modeling. There's sub-basin loading estimates. That's also has a little asterisk by it. As new and more current information comes available, obviously people can use that information and data to make adaptive decisions if they choose. And in tables 30 and 31, there are practices for phosphorus management with cost estimates, if needed, that target both total phosphorus and soluble phosphorus to maximize some of those soluble reductions to get even more improvement in chlorophyll A. And so Cayuga's list of clean water plans. It has a lot of clean water plans. It has action plan, TMDL now, several drinking water source protection plans in development. Someone will let me know if any of them are finished. I don't recall. The watershed restoration and protection plan, and then of course all of the county soil and water conservation districts have their strategic and AEM plans that they're actively working to implement. And so essentially with the TMDL being done, any project that targets phosphorus reductions would score well in a grant application. So if there are ideas in these other plans that are also good, obviously you can kind of use them in conjunction with the TMDL to go after the various state funds to implement. I might have to mute in a second. Someone just got home and my dogs are very awake. So if they start barking and I go mute, that's why. So, oops, sorry. State grant, the different funding sources that are available. This is not an exhaustive list, but there are state programs through the DEC, like the WQIP and NPG program. The EFC has funds, Department of State, Ag and Markets. Those are all statewide. There are Finger Lakes and Great Lakes specific funding through FLOPA, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and then both Great Lakes and Finger Lakes small grant programs. The DEC, I thought I had this on here, but I don't think I do. There's a funding finder tool that's available on the DEC's website that anyone can use. It's filterable by your organization and what your goals are. It's a pretty good resource to help narrow down the world of funding sources that are available so you can make a more informed decision, because going after grants obviously takes time and you want to focus on the ones that you're more likely to be successful at. Project tracking and moving forward. This also says draft, you'll notice, but we in the Finger Lakes program with our other Vision of Water partners and other state partners like Ag and Markets, we're working to build better tracking of what's going in where in the state. And so what you're seeing on the right is a draft of that. It's a internal tracking tool now. Each of those little shapes are Huck 12 watersheds where we are able to link up and harvest from existing databases to see how much and what types of projects are going into each Huck 12. So a Huck is a hydrologic unit code, 12 is a very small subbasin. And so, right now we're kind of building it out. It's certainly in the works, but we're feeling better about kind of its abilities to be usable as a tracking tool. Some of the databases that we have access to now are here in this little table through the GLRI, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Inflation Reduction Act on the federal side, the non-point source database from Ag and Markets through those two programs, and the DEC's database for WQIP. And so it's getting there. We've made good progress last year. We're making continued progress this year. It's a lot of data kind of wrangling and cleanup. A lot of grants, as an example, are kind of split across a couple Huck 12. So figuring out which pots went to which Huck, figuring out if more than one grant was used on more than one project. We don't want to double count, right, funding. We don't want to undercount funding. So we're working through those projects to make sure that we're providing a good understanding of what's being done where. Monitoring programs. This is where we are really going to be able to tell whether or not we're meeting our in-lake water quality targets, are through data sets collected in the lake itself. DEC has several water quality monitoring programs in the state. This map here with the different colored dots is the DEC's Division of Water Quality Monitoring Portal. Each of the blue dots is a lake for which DEC has data. Every orange dot is a stream for which DEC has data. Some of them are long-term monitoring sites. Some of them are one-off samplings. The Finger Lakes, including Cayuga, we're pretty lucky. We have good partners at the local level that are implementing our CSLAP program. That's our Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program that is out in the lake in each regulatory segment, collecting things like phosphorus and nitrogen and chlorophyll and clarity and other things so that we can monitor water quality moving forward. both prior to and after implementation of the TMDL, so we can understand how conditions are improving or staying the same, and make decisions based on what we see. Other programs, the DEC LCI program, Streams program, NIHABS obviously is providing information on algal bloom reports. WAVE is a volunteer macroinvertebrate sampling program for streams. And that's in addition to local monitoring programs. Ithaca area has a lot of good active partners collecting data from around the watershed and in the lake. And of course, not-for-profit private academic research is also being conducted on Cayuga. And we'll work with those partners to make sure that we can use the data if we can. If it's of a sufficient quality, we'd love to use it in our evaluations of Cayuga Lake. And so in summary here, the in-lake targets are summer average chlorophyll A with current data. And what this table is showing is sampling years from 2018 through 2023 for each of the 4 regulatory segments. The number is the summer average chlorophyll, which is the Cayuga Lake threshold benchmark that we're interested in. And what the yellow is showing is whether or not that particular segment is meeting the target as outlined in the TMDL. And gray means it is not meeting the target. And so what you can see is that in some of the segments, like the southern end and the mid-north, we're meeting that 6 micrograms per liter in many of the years, which is good. The main lake mid-south, the threshold is more stringent because it's a AA water, and you can see that we're meeting that in about 2 out of 6 years. So obviously more work needs to be done there. And then the northern end, which is a recreation segment, we're meeting at about half the years. We're meeting that 8 micrograms per liter. So this type of information is obviously, what we're interested in, and valuable for us to understand how Cayuga is doing with regards to our goals. And that's all I have. I do have a couple more data slides if people want to see what it looks like currently compared to historic levels in Cayuga Lake. Cayuga Lake is pretty lucky to have a rich history of data to continue to evaluate longer term trends, but I can pause there or dive into the next handful depending on interest. So thank you again for having me.
Joe.
Tony, hi, Roxy. I have a question for Tony. Tony, my name is Tony Del Plato. I'm a village trustee in Interlake, and the data, of course, is important for those who look at it and know and understand what it's telling us. Is there some way to convey the health of the lake to people who ask us, what's the story? I mean, we have HAB problems. We have fertilizer, pesticide discharges. What can I tell people as a trustee and as the village water commissioner, the quality of our lake water?
Sure. I think what I can do is I can provide a series of links that you can just share with people where all the water quality for Cayuga Lake is summarized.
Uh-huh.
We have a couple of reports that we've published about all the Finger Lakes in the context of the rest of the Finger Lakes, which I can also provide in that summary. But what might be the best is to kind of link people to the different monitoring tabs and the summaries that are done annually for each of the CSLAP locations, including Cayuga Lake.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Roxy, you'll remind me to send that out to you.
Yeah. You think
Okay.
I remember stuff. Okay, I'm highlighting it. I have a
Yep.
follow-up question though, because I think what Tony's looking for is something succinct and simple. What you're going to give them is detailed, substantiated information.
Mhm.
Maybe you could tell us just on the scale of like, with simpler words, eutrophic to oligotrophic, like how's Cayuga
Sure.
Lake doing?
So mesotrophic for most parameters.
And the
So
simple term for the simple explanation for that would be
kind of middle levels for nutrients and chlorophyll. So not the cleanest, not the dirtiest. It's kind of at the kind of the middle level. and hasn't changed too much over the last 20 or 30 years.
Joe, you've been wanting to
Yeah.
ask a question.
Yeah, in one of your earlier slides, you mentioned zoning is one of the tools for lowering the phosphorus load. And Lansing's about to do a major rewrite of our zoning code. We just got a State Department grant to help us with that.
Oh, good.
So my question is, what should I be looking for? Do you have a list of things that we should incorporate into zoning to help?
Who are you working with at Department of State? Do you have a contact?
We just got a grant from them.
Okay.
So I'm not sure they're gonna work us through it other than, follow through with redoing our entire zoning code. But it's a
Okay.
rewrite of our whole zoning code is what we got a grant.
Oh,
for.
wow. Okay. I can give that some thought. I don't know of specifics that I'd recommend now, but I know that DOS is part of their grants. So usually we'll take a look at a review of local laws and help make recommendations for things that you're interested in. So I don't know that I'm going to have too many answers for you tonight, but I can certainly connect you with folks that can help you through that.
Okay, that'd be great, because I want to get it in at the beginning, not something that somebody complains about as we're finishing the process.
Sure.
I'll jump in.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna say, yeah, Joe, I'll get in touch with you. We have some just, fairly generic things that we recommend to anybody going through, either a comprehensive plan or whatever. So, may not fit your application, or it might, but it might give you a starting point at least to, just some blanket stuff that we recommend
Yeah,
to put
that'd
in
be
these type of
great.
plans.
That'd be wonderful. I mean, I've got some basics. We're going to do stream water corridors and things like that, but there's going to be stuff that I don't have off the top of my head. Anything that can get fed into this will just make it better.
I'll
So
jump
thank
in
you.
real quick and say that Dryden is just going through that process as well. And they have a report back from a consultant that they're working with on suggestions. So maybe Dave Sprout can hook you up with some of that information.
Yeah, I haven't been privy to that whole thing, but yeah, stream corridor protection is definitely on the list of things. I haven't seen much of the report other than that, though.
Okay, well, I can connect with them too, because they came up when we presented some information from our drinking water source protection plan and some stormwater changes that we recommended for large scale solar installations. And they said that merged well with a lot of what they were getting back from their consultant. So I'll pick up that conversation and get you what information I can, Joe.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, other questions for Tony? Keep them coming.
I thought that was a great presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it feels good to be giving it. I can tell you.
Good not to get those questions anymore, right, Tony? When's the TMDL
Yeah,
come
no,
out? When's the TMDL
it
come
was
out?
it was a long, hard process. We stayed the course and we got it done, so it's good. Yeah, and so obviously in the Finger Lakes program, we're continuing to work on lots of different fronts, right? Not just Cayuga TMDL. I mean, we're still working on funding the Eastern Finger Lakes Coalition of Districts, of which 6 of the counties in the Eastern Finger Lakes are in Cayuga's watershed, right? So we're working with those partners on trying to find access to more funding to do more implementation, which will only help implement clean water plants across the Finger Lakes, including Cayuga's TMDL. So
I see a question from Eileen.
Hi, Tony.
hi.
So the CAFO permit currently allows the application of more phosphorus than is needed for the crops based upon Cornell's P index.
Okay.
Given that, is DEC considering changing the permit for CAFOs within the Cayuga Lake watershed to not allow this over application?
I don't know about the over application comment. I can get you in contact with the CAFO permit folks in Albany, and they could help you help answer that question.
Yeah, no, we had a presentation by Kirsten from Pro Dairy, and she did say that it does allow that. So my question is not really understanding the CAFO permit, but is
Mm.
that, DEC would be requiring municipalities to upgrade their, change their permits. So that's what I'm just wondering, is this something that might be on the table to change the permit due to, the fact that phosphorus needs to be reduced?
So as far as I know, there's no specific Cayuga CAFO permit issue that's being considered. So the TMDL didn't make any recommendations specific to the CAFO permit in Cayuga Lakes watershed.
Okay, thank you.
Eileen, are you sure she said that they're over applying phosphorus? Because that's typically the point of the P index is that you maximize your phosphorus application, and sometimes you end up over applying nitrogen because of that. But the phosphorus index is based on the soil tests that the farms have to have for the permit.
Yeah,
that you're
so the way she explained it is if the phosphorus level in the soil is really, really high, then you cannot add more than what is needed specifically. But if the phosphorus level is like in the middle range and you'd say you're going to do some best management practices to help reduce runoff, then you can add more phosphorus.
I'll reach out
That's
to the
what-
CAFO permit folks in Albany and ask. I'm not too familiar with that permit and its nuances, but I can dig into that and see what they say.
So, not based necessarily on that particular issue, but this raises a general thought for me. If something comes along where you think there might be a good change that would be significant, and easier to implement, than other things, is that something that stakeholders could bring to DEC to consider using or implementing?
Like a best management practice as an example.
Yeah, or even like a state program that this rolls out in a certain way. If it turns out that if it rolled out in a different way, it might be significant, is that a conversation the state would be willing to have?
Yeah, I'm trying to envision what that would be. But yeah, I mean, if you have thoughts and ideas on a program or a best management practice, yeah, feel free to reach out.
Okay, Darby, I see your hand.
I had a similar type question that Roxy's alluding to there, is that, we see that a lot of grant funding available and, but we're as CWIO, as an intermunicipal organization, we have a hard time finding projects that municipalities want to do. And, we have this ongoing submit your projects. Isaac's here to help write grants. And so I think what would be helpful for us, and we can talk about it into the future, is really sitting down and targeting, whether it's the sub-watershed or by municipality, like what are some useful projects that could be done?
Sure.
What are some BMPs to implement? And so that we can almost take those to the municipalities and be like, okay, where do you need to improve culverts? Where, and maybe it's even on the ag side of where is manure storage needed. But I mean, I think for this group, really focusing on municipal projects and maybe it's stream stabilization. So I think we do we'll follow up in the nearest future about those tables 30 and 31 and how to move forward with those.
Yeah, well, we're talking as a technical committee in 2 weeks, right? I think the 5th. Do we have an appointment to talk on the 5th, right? As a work through those questions.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's one of right. So
Yeah.
Of the list of things that are kind of on my priority list for 2025, right? The the funding obviously is important, and then the implementing and tracking who's doing what where, and how is it working, and then kind of working more closely with the IOs to see what kind of what your needs are, and kind of how you solicit projects, what sort of feedback do you get. Yeah, those are, I think, we're going to start those conversations on the 5th with you and having them with other IOs as well. So, yeah.
Thanks. And sorry, can I just follow up quick? You asked about the DWSP2s,
Right.
or City of Ithaca has finished theirs.
Okay, good.
Cornell's under review by the state since as of May of last year.
Okay.
And Bolton Point's actually meeting tomorrow, so I'll know more. But then there's been some townwide DWSP2s. So like the town of Dryden has one, the town of Enfield and is finished with theirs, and Ulysses is working on theirs. And I only know of the Tompkins County municipalities. I'm not sure about any of the others if they've worked
So
with the New
We're
York
making
Rural
progress
Water.
then. Making a lot of
Yeah.
progress there.
Yeah.
Good. Hey, Eileen.
Would street cleaners be something that municipalities could get money for to remove leaves and everything before they get into the stormwater system? Is that something that's available as far as you know?
I think that's that sort of equipment is listed in the WQIP grant, I think. I think that is. Don't hold me 100%, but I think if you look into the DEC WQIP program outline, it'll list the types of equipment you can buy for things like street cleaning. But I that's where I would check. If I stop sharing, I'll Google it really quickly and I'll let you know.
Well, on the sharing front, did anyone want to see some of the extra data slides that Tony had? If so, go ahead and say so now while he's still got it up.
Oh, I was just going to say that, Cayuga is lucky. We have, historical records. This is the southern end total phosphorus back from the late 90s through current, southern end chlorophyll, late 90s through current. We can bin it based on intervals and look at it at different thresholds. Obviously, these red lines, this is the guidance value for phosphorus. This is the chlorophyll target for the southern end. Obviously, you're aware of the draft nutrient criteria that are out for flowing waters and ponded waters now. So those red lines will shift depending on which values end up making final cuts. But obviously, so being very data rich, and in the main Lake Mid-South segment, we have data back from the 70s in various reports. So we're able to kind of know and to see what's happening with Cayuga Lake over time, which is important for context and progress. Yeah, Michelle.
So I know we've had the chat many a time about climate change getting rolled into the modeling.
Mhm.
The graph or the table that you showed that had compliance, non-compliance, how much did you see a correlation between heavy storm years allowing for dilution and thus inducing compliance, or drought years causing concentrations?
Yeah, I'd have to take time and get back into not just the TMDL, but the kind of foundational reports from Upstate Freshwater Institute for a year by year. Obviously, year to year variations are driven by lots of things, not just phosphorus concentrations, right? So we know that, if it's a really warm, calm year, you might get higher chlorophyll than other years. So it certainly is a factor. We're still going to, try to get those chlorophyll levels down to their thresholds year after year consistently, but there will be challenges. I mean, look at this Main Lake Mid-North segment, pretty good compliance for all years except for this really, really high year in 2021. We do have a lot of good flow records from at least the southern end of Cayuga and data. I'm sorry, weather station data. So we could tease that out a little more, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what, as an example, caused this high year in 2022 without taking a closer look at the foundational reports and for the previous, for the TMDL, and then, for the current data set, I'd have to, do an analysis to see why that year was higher than the others.
But what we can see is 2021, something happened, because that's when you're seeing almost across the board really high numbers, much higher in the mid to north section than
Yeah.
anything close. But having the whole lake practically going much higher for that year, even the southern end is on a higher end of normal. Something happened in 2021. I think that'd be a start.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, and like I said, it could be rain, it could be drought, it could be temperature, it could be biological effect that we're not usually, you know, privy to, like a change in the fishery or a change in zooplankton grazing. It could be lots of things. So obviously that's more of a research avenue than a, you know, are we kind of meeting our TMDL measurements? But definitely a good point, Michelle.
Thanks. Yeah, and it totally blends into the choice of location for best management practices and what efforts are sort of teased out at the top, mid, and then, okay, but we can back burner this a little bit level.
Okay, I have another question. Earlier you talked about the tracking the TMDL, and you mentioned under monitoring, the last category was nonprofits, private and academic research. And I know that you alluded to the fact that they need to meet the QAP basically, right,
Yeah.
to be useful. How will that have to be initiated from the non-for-profits end, or will there be some kind of regular communication or easy way for them to provide their data? Have you envisioned how to use that?
Yeah, sure. So the way that the usual case is that in odd numbered years, so 2025 being one of them, DEC, Division of Water, will put out a solicitation email to people that have collected data throughout the state. And then those data sets can be submitted for review and screening for inclusion in how the DEC assesses the waters of the state. And so that's the usual mechanism how it happens for external data to the DEC. The quality assurance expectations that we would have for the Division of Water are outlined on our quality assurance website for anybody to look at and see. So that as they collect data, they can have confidence that they're collecting it in a way that the DEC would consider it for use. And so there's no real big secret or real other mechanism other than kind of moving it in, you know, to our assessment programs in odd numbered years. And I know that some Cayuga Lake groups in the last cycle were successful at getting their data into the system for assessments on Cayuga Lake. So definitely that process is been taken advantage of by, I think, Community Science Institute, and I think some folks at the northern end of Cayuga Lake got their data in as well.
I have a follow-up question, and
Yeah.
this is probably in flux, but I was just reading something EPA has out for comment, and it's about the 303D list. But one of the things that they talk about is that if data is provided outside of that solicitation period, that it should be used in the next year's round. Does DEC do that? Do you hold on to that data and use it the next go around? Or do you know?
I don't know. I mean, I know the assessment team and basically how it works. I don't know what their procedure is for accepting data in kind of off-cycle years. That would be a question for them.
Okay.
I can ask. I'll make myself a note to double
Okay,
check.
thank you.
I think it's a good question, but I don't know if they usually accept it in even years or they hold it until the next odd year and then do the assessment on it. I'm just not clear exactly on timing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
See what you find out.
C and I are having a grand time looking at that EPA 303D list response. I don't know. I think we spent an hour and a half on it today. We're really digging into it. I think at least it's the first time I've ever looked at EPA's comments to DEC. So are you part of those discussions, or I don't know what arm of DEC that discussion goes on?
Not usually. Tangential, or maybe if something comes through that the assessment folks need some help with from like a watershed program, I might get called into it, but I'm normally aware of it. I read through it myself. I'm not all the way through it either, but normally the division out of Albany and the assessment teams take care of those things.
Yeah, we're curious how that silt sediment discussion goes, where the silt and sediment discussion goes.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I'd have to look back through. I don't know if the EPA documents have a public comment period either, if they're accepting
Yeah.
questions. They are.
Yeah,
too.
yep, 30
Yeah.
day comment period, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 30 days. Okay.
Oh, geez. Do I have to add that as your resolution tonight? I do, don't I?
Oh, yeah.
Fruity,
Yeah,
fruity
so
face.
obviously, that's a question on their methods or their procedures. Feel free to,
Right.
comment publicly to them and they'll respond. So
Oh, Darby got me confused. I had another question. Oh, yes, yes, I know what it is. So you showed those historical records. Can you pop those up again, pretty please?
the data slides,
Yeah. Um,
that one.
yeah, that one. Okay, so right at the very beginning, you said you ran the model, looking at reductions until the targets were met, right? And so that's how you arrived at the 30% reduction in phosphorus would
Yep.
get you to the chlorophyll A target most of the time and
Right.
move you towards the total phosphorus guidance value. Okay. Um, so then, so immediately I highlighted, well, how long did that take? Because there's the time for water to move through the lake. And I guess
Mhm.
this slide sort of supports that idea that things don't change that fast. So
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a big watershed and a big lake, and I think the flushing rate on a mixed basis for Cayuga is 10 years-ish, I think.
yeah,
Maybe a little longer, a little shorter,
10 or
depending
12,
on.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're talking, we're talking many flushing cycles to kind of get um, to see improvements based on, kind of what we're implementing in the past and what we're implementing now. So
So do you have a sense for all these years where it's, it's not making giant changes, all these years, what the input loads, what the loads were estimated as? Like, has our loading increased steadily? Is it less than it was in the 70s?
yeah,
Do you have any sense of that?
that I wouldn't know. So the loading inputs to the TMDL were done, for the model setup and calibration period for the
Sure.
16 years. So I don't know that anyone's replicated that in recent years. So I wouldn't be able to. I don't think I'd be able to answer that.
Okay. Eileen again.
I have a follow-up on Roxy's question.
Yeah.
Say in 5 years, you look at this graph and, it's got 5 more years on it, and it doesn't look like there's much improvement.
Hmm.
What happens then?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have an answer for that. I think in the TMDL we've kind of committed to adaptive management. I think we'll keep an eye on trends and whether or not those years where we're in compliance are getting kind of more frequent or less frequent. But in terms of what EPA's response would be to that, I don't think I know the answer to that.
So when you ran the model, sorry, I'm just hopping in again. When you ran the model, was there any sense of time scale on that 30% reduction achieving those targets or not?
No, we didn't run it that way. What we
Okay.
did was we basically flushed the system through a bunch of times and then saw what the 30% reduction was. So we didn't trend it out, in terms of it's going to take 25 years or 50 years or 10 years or 5 years to get to the reductions that were needed.
So when you say you flushed the system several times, do you mean like a flush that would represent the 10 to 12 years through
We
the
ran
lake?
the model at the reduced loading for a bunch of cycles. And then figured out what the chlorophyll and phosphorus values were based on that model that was run at the scenario level for purposes of understanding what happened in the what will happen in the lake as part of those reductions.
But a cycle doesn't necessarily equal a flushing rate?
No, I use that kind of general. Yeah, we
Okay.
ran the model for an
Okay.
extended period of time to get the loading kind of constant, right, at the reduced level to see what the impact on the lake was. But we didn't, as far as I know, I'd have to No, we didn't. We didn't check
Okay.
and say, well, continued reductions over, a decade or 2 decades were required.
Okay, I'll quit trying to pin you down to something that doesn't exist.
No, no, I don't think that exists.
Okay. Let's see. Do other folks have questions? Okay, I have one. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I typed one into the chat.
You wanna go ahead and just say what it is?
So I'm just knowing that every single lake is its own system. Do we know what Cayuga Lake's balance level is? And I added non-anthropogenic.
So what was it, undeveloped from pre-colonial times, like that sort of?
Well, there's that. There's also what would it, because every system has its loading balance that it's normally sitting at with sediments, with nutrients, in that is the happy state.
Mhm.
And all systems will go back to their balance, whether it's sinuosity, erosion, all of those things, as well as nutrients.
Mhm.
So given that, where's the balance level at?
So I don't know what the like pre-colonization levels would be. The model wasn't run that way. What the model tells us is that a 30% reduction based on the loads that came into the lake over the 98 to 2013 period, so that level puts the lake in compliance with our chlorophyll targets. I think that's the best way that I can answer that question.
So I'm
And that
asking the flip on that. Do the targets match what the lake's normal balance levels are at?
I don't know what normal balance levels means, I guess. I mean, if you're talking like 1970s, I think phosphorus and chlorophyll were probably higher in the 70s. If we're talking 1700s, I don't have a good sense of what what those levels were.
What sample locations are there that would be well away from any known point source inputs?
In
Cayuga Lake.
the main lake mid-south would be the one that would be, so the one we're looking at now, that would be the one that would be kind of the farthest away from any direct tributary or point source inputs.
Okay.
Did you say main lake mid-south
Yeah,
location?
that's kind of historic site. It's a little north of Taganek Park.
Oh yeah.
If you
Okay.
went even farther up, kind of the very middle of the deepest part of the lake, I think the phosphorus and chlorophyll numbers are a little different than Taganek, but near Taganek. But that's the one that we use as the long-term monitoring site for Cayuga.
All right, so I have another, we've talked about this at other meetings, but I like to bring it up, and I just again like stress get to hear from you as a representative from DEC, the state's long-term commitment to these goals. So when you measure the impacts of the projects that go in, which you've done from 2013 to 2022, and gotten, I wrote it down somewhere, 30 some thousand pounds, and we have like 92 or something to go, right? Per year of reductions. Okay.
Right.
So you're measuring projects that went in that time period. So those projects, many of them will lose, not all, but many will have a lifetime, right? And they'll lose their effectiveness.
Right.
So this is a forever permanent commitment from the state to increase their support for ongoing projects and rehabbing and continual approval. It's not like one and done. Do you feel like you see that level of commitment in the funding programs that are coming out or that exist now? Or also do you feel that we have the capacity to do that kind of implementation?
Yeah, so obviously I can't speak into the future what the funding for programs is going to be. Obviously that depends on a lot of things, federal administration, state administrations, that sort of thing. The current administration in New York State has kind of kept that funding level at high levels, which is great. We have been successful on a few different fronts in the Finger Lakes. We were able to get capacity investments at the Eastern Finger Lakes Coalition of Districts for 1.2 million per year, which obviously is helpful for implementing these sorts of things. And we were able to leverage into the Clean Water Infrastructure Act and Bond Act funding to get an additional $42 million in funding to do best management project implementation. And so in terms of kind of recent successes, we have been successful above and beyond the different funding from the EPF and WQIP and, you know, those sorts of things, at getting extra money for the Eastern Finger Lakes, you know, including Cayuga. I do know, I can't speak to this program specifically, but I do know that the Finger Lakes Lake Ontario Watershed Protection Alliance has been successful recently at getting increases in their state appropriations. Now that's not just implementation. They do lots of different things with that funding, including invasive species work and, you know, those sorts of things. So, you know, as far as kind of recent gains or successes, I can point to those, but I just don't know what the long-term picture is going to look like for funding. I will say that that 30% reduction on the 131,000 pounds per year, you know, our tack with developing the TMDL for Cayuga was based on kind of the principle of being as conservative as we could. And so, you know, the average loading case, you know, phosphorus inputs to the year per year to the lake, we used the average load over that 16-year model development period, which included some very big tropical storms and hurricanes, you'll remember, from 2011 and 2013. And a couple of really big runoff event years in 2004 and a snowmelt year in 2006. And, you know, we had some debate of whether or not to use like the median load or the average load over the years to set the TMDL. And the reason we went with the average load was to be more protective. So if we ask for a 30% reduction on a bigger number, we're asking for a bigger reduction. So it was to be, you know, provide an extra margin of safety given, you know, intense rainstorms and things like that. So that's something to keep in mind, that we did pick a bigger number to be more protective, but it also looks like a bigger number is needed, right? And I think once we get our heads around, you know, the full picture of implementation in terms of, you know, state DECs, state ag and markets, what's being done through the AEM programs, what's being done through private and local investments, I think we're going to see that, you know, amount implemented per year is going to get bigger. I'm not saying we're going to get the whole, you know, pie chart done right now without more work, but I suspect that there's a lot more being done that we aren't capturing yet. And so that's one of my goals for 2025, is to get a better picture of a better, more accurate picture of what's being implemented.
Yeah, Eileen?
Eileen?
So the TMDL had to be approved by the EPA.
Okay.
Do they have any further oversight on the results? Like in 10 years, can they say, hey, DEC, you need to do something because these numbers aren't moving? Or is this no longer under EPA's oversight?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll note that down with your other one about the for the EPA. We have monthly meetings with them on not just Cayuga, but TMDL issues. I'll see what their response is on the time question and the continued oversight. Obviously, they have, through their authority at the Clean Water Act, you know, oversight over the states and how they run their programs. I just don't know the specific answer. I do know that once the TMDL is completed for a water body that was on the 303D list, it gets moved to a separate category of the listing. It still is kind of there, but it just gets moved to the, you know, TMDL is completed And so it doesn't stay on the impaired water bodies list anymore. It goes on to the impaired, but a plan has been, complete. But it's a good question. I just don't know the answer. I can find that out.
Okay, I can't help myself. One more. So you have calculated some level of improvements or pounds per year that we've already attained. Yet our number in 2023 isn't close to meeting our new targets. So if you get a better picture, and you're capturing a lot
Oh,
more stuff.
2023 was, sorry. There are some years that weren't, but 2023 was.
Okay. Well, okay, so let's say that you find that you were missing 75% more projects. So you've actually reduced, I don't know, a good percentage of what you were hoping for. But that doesn't actually represent new reductions. It feels a little bit like a circular argument to me. Like we have reductionists that we're getting credit for, but we're not actually moving the needle on water quality. We're just.
No, I understand. I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't know what else to say other than we'll have to do better at tracking what's being done and continue to monitor the water quality in the lake. And I mean, obviously, big systems like Cayuga, there are lots of things above and beyond phosphorus that are driving chlorophyll, right? And so if just because phosphorus is the limiting nutrient doesn't mean that light or temperature weren't kind of the bigger picture limiting factors, right? And we can't control those things. We can just continue to implement and control the sources of phosphorus as best we can.
Sorry, you can all hear me typing, I'm sure. Any other questions for Tony? Well, I can't thank you enough again for giving all the time you have to the community and around the watershed, and taking this talk around, and taking those hard questions or hard to understand questions from us.
No, they're good. They're good questions. I mean, it's definitely a challenge, but I think we're well positioned to keep making gains and to keep improving kind of what we're doing on the landscape and yeah, it's exciting to move on to this phase for Cayuga.
Yeah, it is exciting to be out of the other phase. All right, well, you're welcome to stay with us if you want, or go off and see your dogs, as you wish. And we'll move on into the rest of the agenda and wrap up the meeting, okay? All right.
I think I will. I think I'll bow out. Thanks again. And
Okay,
I
Tony.
think we're talking on the 5th on
Yes.
Yep.
some of
Yep.
the residual questions and kind of moving forward. So looking forward to it.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.